are you in pain?
Not too much. Not too much right now.
And can you tell me about your story and your pain journey?
Sure. Um, I had a bad trampoline accident when I was 15 years old, and pretty much blew apart a disc in my back into little pieces. Fairly rare thing called a sequestered disc. And I lived with escalating pain for 15 years. It just got worse and worse, and my life got more circumscribed. And I had two little kids, but I couldn't roughhouse with them. And I think it's because of the way men, especially my generation, earlier generations, are raised to be stoic. I was just going to tough it out and live with it for the rest of my life. And after my father died, I somehow got permission to be vulnerable and to say, I can't take this anymore. So I had back surgery in 1990, which totally changed my life. That, along with a lot of alternative healing. And suddenly could do the things I hadn't been able to do. Suddenly I could play basketball and go hiking and ride a bike. And 2 years later, I had a very serious bicycle accident in New York and ended up with 3 different types of brain damage and a crushed spinal cord. And I ended up a quadriplegic. And that is where I really got introduced. I mean, I thought my back pain was bad before that accident, but spinal cord pain is just unreal, and it's unrelenting, and drugs don't work on it. Morphine doesn't work on it. I didn't know that, but opiates work between your peripheral nerves and your central nervous system, and your spine is part of your central nervous system. So all it can do is distract you, basically. So I don't know if you've ever had a severe electric shock, but this was akin to every single pore in my body from my shoulders down being electrocuted for weeks on end. So I'd never experienced anything that constant and just intolerable. And I was in intensive care, and they had monitors telling me when I was breathing too shallowly. I'd start meditating and breathing shallowly, and monitor would go off saying you're about to die, and you really get crazy in intensive care. I was doing all this qigong energetic work to try to work on my neck because I couldn't do anything else. I literally could not move below my shoulders. And the pain just built and built and built. And anybody touched me, I would scream. It got to the point where they gave me an infection in my foot through an IV line, and I broke out into a fever, and then they put a fan on me, and my hair follicles in my arms moving to the breeze woke me up screaming. It was just this kind of bizarre, I'm totally numb, and at the same time, everything is totally exaggerated. But I had a unique experience in the hospital, which to this day, I do not know if it really happened or if it was like a visitation from God or a creation of my subconscious. I really don't know, except it was so counterintuitive, I don't think I made it up. But basically, after a week of this pain, I was just broken. I was unable to see any future, unable to feel any hope. It was especially bad at night. I had a lot of friends visit me during the day, and I would joke with them, and I would sort of keep it together, but at night I would just fall apart. And about 3 nights into this place of being totally prostrated, crushed, defeated, and the world is very small. The world is just as big as my head and a little bit. I can't even feel my body except for the pain. So there's just this little world around my bed. Everything else is murky. And it's the middle of the night, and I'm crying bitterly. I'm doing this kind of whole body weeping, which is kind of how I cry anyway. It's very energetic. And this old doctor appears next to my bed, with a white jacket on. He's really old. He's like in his 70s. And he says, "Why are you crying?" And I am really pissed off at this question. And I'm thinking, here's another guy who's going to tell me boys don't cry, which is all I heard when I was a little boy. We all hurt. It's why I didn't get back surgery for 15 years, is that mindset. So I said, I'm crying because I hurt and it's not stopping and I can't take it and I just want to die. And I was actually in the neuro intensive care ward. So it's a very specific place in Bellevue, which is mostly spinal cord injuries. So he said to me, well, nobody else in this room is crying. And then I really got angry and I was like, yes, that's right. I'm the weakest person here. You know, they're all so stoic and, you know, they're so strong. I was really being sarcastic. And he said, do you know why no one else is crying? And I said, yes, because they're all better than I am. He said, no, they're not crying because they're never going to feel anything again. Their spinal cords have been severed. He pointed to somebody I couldn't see. He said, that woman got drunk and fell off a bar stool last week, and she's going to be on a respirator the rest of her life. You fell off a bike going 40 miles an hour, and you're in pain, and you're the only person here who's in pain because you're the only person who has any wiring left. And I'm getting goosebumps because he said, this is your road back. Pain is your road back. You have to stop turning away from it, and you have to dive into it. And not exactly, he didn't say make it your friend, but you have to be with it and let it show you, you know, how to recover. And 2 days later, they took me out of intensive care and they put me in a private room in the neuro ward. And they brought in this crazy gurney that folded down into sort of like an Adirondack chair wheelchair. So it's this gurney that turns into a wheelchair, and they wheeled me down to physical therapy. And I was still pretty hopeless, but the pain had gone down a little bit. They'd put me on a drug called Tegretol, which I think is used for epilepsy, and it had cut the pain down a little bit. They couldn't even use it until the swelling in my spinal cord came down. So I went down to this big room where all the physical therapists are working, and I have a catheter, and I have a bag of piss strapped to me, and I have a diaper, and I'm 32 years old, and I've been in the best shape of my life, and I have 2 little kids, and now I'm this old, crushed, useless person in a diaper, and I'm really still pretty negative and extremely angry and extremely sorry for myself. But I said, well, what the hell? I'm going to ask God. I don't even believe in God per se, but I'm going to ask God for a sign. So I looked around at these physical therapists, and this one physical therapist, her energy just caught my attention. And it was round robin. Like whoever was done would come up and pick the next person. There was no like, you're assigned to this person. I said, God, let that person be my physical therapist. And she was. And almost every other physical therapist there was fresh out of school and knew lots of theory and knew nothing about injury and recovery in terms of experience. This woman, who was, I think, a New Zealander, she'd been doing it for 30 years. And she immediately made me do things that hurt like hell. She put a pillow in my mouth and said, okay, now you have to, you know, reach for this thing. And by that time, I'd gotten a little bit of motion back. I mean, a tiny bit. It had taken me literally a week in bed to move one finger. I don't know if you've ever seen Kill Bill, but she does this whole thing where she moves a toe and she's like, okay, let's get the rest of you 10 little piggies going like it's no big deal. And instead it was like every single thing was ridiculously, you know, sweat pouring off me and like a day's work to get a little further. But by the time I was there, I could do a little, and she would take my arms, which were kind of like a stroke victim's, especially this one. This was the most, it was like this, and she'd pull it out, and I'd be screaming and biting onto this thing. But she was not just stretching out the muscles, she was literally stretching out the nerves too, which I didn't know. And the strangest thing happened. I left that first session somehow getting that pain was my way back. Like somehow my relationship with the pain had changed. And the next time they came for me, I said, I'm not going to get in the chair. You've got to stand me up. I'm going to walk. I walked with 2 orderlies holding on to me because I couldn't feel my feet. And I just went completely crazy working. And I was supposed to be in rehab for 6 months. I was never supposed to walk again. And what happened was when I woke up, because that's what I really feel like. I feel like that day I wanted to get better and I took charge. I immediately started bringing alternative healers, and the hospital would complain, and I'd say, show me the patient's Bill of Rights again, and we'd fight, and I refused certain medicines, and I just took control of my own case. And I remember they took my chart away because I was having my wife read my chart to me. And they infantilize you in the hospital. They took me for tests when I was still in the intensive care without any warning. You're vulnerable, you're in pain, you can't move, you don't know anyone, and suddenly they're wheeling you away, and you're traumatized. You don't even know if your family can find you. You're not thinking rationally. This was my entire experience in the hospital. I had a few nice nurses and a really wonderful physical therapist, but there was this attitude that I was kind of like a piece of meat to be carted around. And one guy, who I called Dr. Nazi, would come in and grab my hand and squeeze it hard every morning, which the sound, I remember hearing sounds and not even realizing I was making them, but they were the sounds you would imagine in a like Chilean torture chamber. I mean, just full-throated screams, you know, and this guy would do it every day. Well, your hand's not better, you know. I had doctors come in, and I had a doctor come in with a whole class of interns, most of whom were female, pull my sheet off and say, this is, you know, look at the rictus here and the tone here. This person's obviously severely spinal damaged, never going to move again. And actually start to walk out without even putting the sheet back on me. And I actually called him back and cursed at him and told his class, this is an example of bad bedside manner. But that was most of my experience. And this woman empowered me. But she empowered me in a very militant way. You know, I'd always had a problem with authority. So I took that pain, jumped into it, and took control. One thing I've learned, and it's funny, I've read some books. There's a great book called Time on Fire by an actor who was, I think he was on Sex and the City and Californication. He had a rare form of leukemia, and he just fought everything they did, and he would have died if he hadn't fought. I learned that I was in charge, and my doctors were like my junior partners. And I think that's true for any life-threatening or even psyche-threatening disease. It's really true with pain, you know, that you have to be in charge. They don't know what you're going through. They can't know. Only you know, and only you have the insight into how to transform that pain. So after a few weeks of physical therapy with her, against my will, they moved me to Rusk Institute for rehabilitation, where all of the people working on me were very young, very nice, very earnest, and had no experience. So they all did everything by the book, and I totally blew their mind because I had been doing Qigong and Tai Chi for years. So we had a class called ambulation class, where you're supposed to learn to walk. And the first thing, according to the rules, is they put you on a walker. Except my arms didn't work. My legs actually at that point were working better than my arms. But this is the rule. So they put me on a walker and I try to hold it. But by the end of that day, I was walking with a cane. I went from a walker to 2 4-toed canes to 1 4-toed cane and a single cane to 2 single canes to 1 single cane. And they were amazed. And they said, well, how come you know that when you use 2 canes, it's different than 1? Like there's different mechanics with everything you use. Which I knew intuitively. Like were you a physical therapist? And I was like, no, I did Qigong. I did Qigong for years. So I understood energetically how to use this stuff. But the funny thing in ambulation class is everyone there has either had a diving accident, a motorcycle accident, or a stroke, or an aneurysm, and they're all like lumps like this. They're just sitting there. And their turn comes, and they're hauled up onto their feet, and they try to move. This New Zealand physical therapist had given me the equivalent of the speech in that movie where he says, if you build it, they will come. She said, if you try to move, your body will find a way to move again. So I'm sitting in that class and I'm lifting my legs and I'm twitching and I'm moving. And that even annoyed them. It wasn't part of the protocol, which is amazing to me. I mean, that's the number one lesson, you know, to me is don't follow the protocol. Take control. But that experience with pain, where it didn't exactly become my friend, but it did lead me back into sensation, into movement, into inhabiting my body, which is interesting because picking this up is a distinctly different activity than it was before I was paralyzed. I have to think about it. You don't know that when you pick something up, you actually think about it. But when you lose the ability, then you realize you did, and you realize you have to think about it differently now. Like the gestalt of it is a different activity, which is something they never tell you in the hospital. There are so many things about pain and about paralysis they don't tell you. But the interesting thing is that my relationship with pain keeps changing. About 4 years ago, all my symptoms from my paralysis started coming back. Electric shocks, and I put my arm out the car window, and the wind hitting my hair would hurt, and all kinds of craziness. And it just scared me to death. I mean, I did not realize until that time that I'd slowly started drinking more, that I'd never had any mental health care around this injury. And I think anyone who's been in severe, intractable pain has PTSD. And I had not one visit at Rusk or Bellevue from any kind of mental health professional. And again, I'm tough, I'm a guy, I'm stoic, I beat this thing. Rah, rah, rah. That was kind of where I was at for the last 15 years. And suddenly it was all coming back, and all the fear was back, and I remember I went hiking above my land, and I ended up next to a tree, and I was weeping, holding on to this tree. And I was weeping, and I was like, part of me was like, what's going on here? And part of me was like, my life's over. I'm in a wheelchair, and I have a diaper, and my life's over. And part of me is like, I just hiked up here. There was this weird double exposure going on. And I had read about, the Vietnam vet who's walking down the street and a car backfires, and he knows he's not in Vietnam, but his whole body is like incoming. That's what happened to me. And I got EMDR treatment, which is one of only 2 treatments that is approved by the Veterans Administration for trauma. And I probably couldn't be talking to you this calmly if I hadn't had that treatment. I'd probably be crying. It really did kind of ablate off a lot of the trauma. I think people do not really take into account how traumatized a person in deep physical pain is. You can't think, you have no hope, you're terrified, all you want it to do is stop,
Can you tell me what EMDR is?
EMDR started when a woman was troubled by something. I think she was a clinical psychiatrist, and she was walking, I think through a park, and she was going through dark and light pools of light, sort of the mottled light from trees. And she was thinking about this problem, and she started to feel better. And she's like, what's going on? She took that and started working on tapping one leg and then the other, trying lights in one eye or the other, or following lights back and forth, sounds that might rise in one ear and they get small and rise in the other. All of these things to basically activate both hemispheres of the brain. And the idea behind EMDR, which, they've proven it works, but they haven't really proven if their theories as to why it works are true. But the theory is, roughly, as well as I understand it, that when you are traumatized, unlike an animal which shakes uncontrollably and sort of gets that trauma out, we who are aware of time and space, we can't do that. So we absorb it, and it gets sort of stuck in the amygdala and the primitive parts of the brain. And it never gets processed through the higher functioning areas of the brain. And that part of the brain, the primitive part of the brain, anything that's ever happened to you is always happening. It has no sense of time. So that trauma is now. Even now, there's a little part of me that's still there. That's why I was up on that hill going, I'm still back in physical therapy, because part of me is. And what EMDR does, by you talk about the experience, you recapitulate the experience that traumatized you while you're following these lights or listening to sounds or feeling things buzz in both hands or any combination of these stimuli, and it supposedly brings it up into the consciousness with this entrainment going on that lets the left and the right brain sort of get on the same page about it, and that releases a lot of the traumatic programming. They don't know if that's how it works, but it definitely helped me a lot. If I talk about the day I had my bicycle accident, I could not talk about that without sort of shaking uncontrollably. Now I could talk about it and I'd be pretty much like this.
Wow. That's fascinating.
It's great stuff.
Yeah.
One question I have is, like, 4 years ago, you started feeling like everything was coming back, and if you could ask about, so did it turn around? I mean, where are you now?
How did you get from that?
This is what's amazing to me is that, you know, people talk about psychosomatic things, and I was having this complete physical, direct experience of the recapitulation of the pain. It wasn't as severe, but I mean, it was exactly the same symptoms. And once I treated the trauma, it resolved.
So it was really the EMDR that...
Yeah, it was the EMDR and meditation and getting back into Qigong. It was a bunch of things, but, you know, this wasn't a figment of my imagination. It was more like this trapped experience in my brain was literally getting my body to re-experience it. And that has taught me a lot about maybe not just pain, but the nature of what beingness is. You know, I think the power of the mind, you know, lots of New Age people, lots of Eastern religions say that your mind has the ability to shape reality. And in the Western mechanistic sort of Newtonian world that we grew up in, that seems absurd. Although it doesn't seem absurd that your mind sends a signal down a myelin-coated sheath of nerve to move your arm. Like, that doesn't seem weird to us. But the fact that you can think, oh, you know, I'm sick, and you get sick, seems odd. This experience showed me that my mind has far more power to make me well or make me ill than I ever knew, because all these symptoms were incredibly powerful and painful, and they all resolved. You know, I still have long-term symptoms. I'm still partly numb from the shoulders down. I will cut myself or burn myself and not notice it. I have spasms. I have nerve pain. But this was like this huge resurgence of the original pain, and it's gone through that treatment.
I'm curious, how long after, you know, your initial bike injury, how long did it take before you were able to, like, on a daily basis, live in a level of pain that was manageable?
I think I already had somewhat of a high pain threshold from this back injury, from living with a really bad back injury for 15 years. I got hurt in August, and I remember I was alone. My wife and my kids had gone out. I was alone on my birthday on November 4th, and I almost attempted suicide. I actually opened the window and leaned out and thought about it. And the only reason I didn't was because I had 2 little kids, and I felt like I couldn't morally do it. But the pain was still extreme enough then. They also had me injecting myself blindly in my stomach twice a day with heparin so I wouldn't get blood clots, because they thought I was going to sit at home and not move instead of walking every day, which is what I was doing. I would say it took me 6 or 8 months. So last summer I had this really bad back injury, blew 2 of my discs, and I suddenly was in just the worst pain I'd been in since my spinal cord accident. It was the body's capacity to generate pain is just amazing. And my body splinted up, so I got all kind of twisted. My body was saying, I'm putting you in a cast. I'm going to make all your muscles freak out on you, and you need to sit still, which I wouldn't do. And the pain got worse and worse. In fact, I went hiking. This is, again, like, no matter how much I've learned to be gentle with myself, to be vulnerable, that old training of being macho and stoic sneaks in. And I'll be like, well, I'll go for a hike and feel better. And instead I ended up in horrific pain. And all of the past trauma came roaring back. I was hopeless. I was never going to change. My life was over. And I was weeping. I was weeping for months. You know, I mean, my poor girlfriend was just exhausted. I was screaming in my sleep, you know. And to be truthful, if that had kept up for a few years, I might have killed myself. I mean, I have a lot of hope and a lot of optimism. I'm sort of an optimist in pessimist clothing. And I worked really hard to recover from being paralyzed. And I worked really hard when my symptoms came back. I always throw everything at a problem, which is why I brought in all these alternative medicines and stuff when I was at Bellevue. But I can understand the people who have intractable pain, and either it cannot be ameliorated or they haven't found the way and they want to die. I mean, I get it. It would have taken me probably quite a few years to get to that point, but I can well understand it. However, I have this naive notion that almost any pain can be, that a way can be found. You know, with this last injury, they wanted to do surgery and they wanted to do all this nice Western, you know, extreme stuff to me. And I had been studying this bodywork technique called orthobionomy, which is I actually started receiving treatment when my symptoms came back. That was another thing I did with the EMDR. And I'm very numb from the shoulders down, and I'm very numb at my feet. And when I had my first orthobionomy treatment, which consisted of incredibly subtle touch to my foot got more sensation back in 20 minutes than it had in 20 years.
Wow.
And I went, and there was also like, my body was like, oh, I've been waiting for this. Somebody's talking to me in a way I've been waiting. This is the conversation I've been waiting for. And it was much later that I found out that orthobionomy's sort of tagline, their trademark tagline, is orthobionomy, a healing conversation. And that's really what it's like. So then I started studying it. I had this horrible injury. There's nobody around here who does orthobionomy. I was in too much pain to work on myself. And even if I can, working on yourself is almost never as good. And I wasn't getting better. And I actually finally went down to a senior orthobionomy person twice a week in New Jersey. This incredibly subtle, gentle technique for, you know, for this massive disc herniations. And it worked.
Wow.
You know, that's what started turning me around. And I still have some pain from that accident, but I'm, you know, like probably 85% recovered. I'm certainly recovered enough that I would never think of, you know, killing myself now.
That's amazing.
But I think there are different modalities. I'll give you another example. The bass player in my band got metastatic cancer and died a year ago. And he'd always liked drugs anyway. So he was like, you know, give me the morphine, give me all this stuff. And I worked on him once. I gave him an energy session where he wasn't on anything. And I actually took away his pain for a couple hours. And gradually, not just that experience, but many experiences he had as he was going through the process of dying, he got to the point where he was in the hospital dying with his family around him with no drugs in his system because he wanted to be clear. And the pain was less, not because it was probably physiologically less, but because his relationship to it changed and the way he paid attention to it or listened or didn't listen to it. And even the way he stopped fearing it changed. I'll tell you, you know, the fear of pain is worse than the pain. When I hurt myself, was I in horrible pain last summer? Yes, but it was also all the fear from that previous traumatic injury.
I'm sure. You mentioned your bass player in your band. I know you play piano and guitar and a bunch of instruments. I'm curious if you have numbness in your hands and arms. How does that relate to your music and being able to play?
It's really interesting. I couldn't play guitar for 8 years. And in that period, I started playing piano. And it's really ironic because my like best-selling CD is a piano CD, and I'm not really a piano player. But I actually got some homeopathic treatment after not being able to play for 8 years. They put me on this rare homeopathic thing that no one's ever heard of called helodrylus, which is a worm, which is for spinal cord regeneration. And within weeks, I could play guitar again. It was amazing.
Wow.
And I keep seeing all these videos about homeopathy doesn't work because if you look at the dilution, there's actually none of the chemical in there. And this is, again, the Western mechanistic, from a quantum viewpoint, that medicine has a vibrational and energetic quality that has nothing to do with chemistry. But the West just can't accept that, even when a double-blind study proves it. But I started playing guitar again, but I had to watch my hands because I literally couldn't feel which string I was playing. And I remember I got better, and I was in a duo, an experimental music duo for years, which we had been on hiatus after I got hurt. We got back together. And I remember one day we were playing at this place, at this gig, and I closed my eyes and played a guitar solo. And I opened my eyes and realized that I didn't have to look at my hands anymore. I realized that I could feel just enough, that they knew. And it wasn't just feeling, it's also that my whole proprioceptive system was messed up. It would be very hard for me to close my eyes and touch my nose many years ago. That stuff has slowly built back up. But I could feel enough. The way I play guitar is different. I can only finger pick with 2 fingers. I can't really do any finger picking with these 3. I can play reasonably fast, but I can't play as fast as I could. So my playing has, to me, much more feeling in it and much less, oh, look at me. I mean, it's also part of getting older, I guess. You look at young kids and there's 50 million kids who are technically better than Jimi Hendrix ever was. And after a point, you're like, who cares? What cares is the feeling. And the irony of this injury is that I have less physical feeling, but I have more feeling for energy and for nuance, which is why I also do energy healing work. Because it's like a blind person who can taste better. This arm was the most neurologically damaged, and I can move energy and feel energy with this arm like nobody's business, which I couldn't do before. So, the
That's
injury
amazing.
taketh away and the injury giveth.
Yeah. Would you say that playing instruments and doing your music has been a therapy in itself?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, my piano CD has a lot of pain in it, which was partly a pain of a divorce, but it was also pain about loss. And at 32, I was suddenly 90 years old. And since that day, I haven't been able to box anymore. I used to box. I haven't been able to ski. There are lots of things I had to give up, even though I totally pushed against the doctor's limitations because they said, you're never going to walk again. 2 weeks before I left the hospital, under my own power to a 4-story walk-up, 2 weeks, they said, with no trace of ambiguity, you are going to have to move into a ground floor apartment or a building with an elevator because you're never going to do stairs again. 2 weeks later, I went home. This is how wrong they can be. This is why you just can't take everything they say as gospel. I think when a doctor tells people they have 6 months left to live, a lot of people die at 6 months because this has been, the authority has told them that. Luckily, I've always hated authority. I think anybody who has a problem with authority has a better chance of recovering. But all of that loss of my youth, which has never come back, is in my music. Absolutely.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And in my poetry.
Would you say, I'm curious kind of the path in terms of pain management and healing that the doctors wanted you to take versus maybe you could list what they wanted you to take versus what you ended up doing.
I think I'll talk about this most recent one because they basically said with my spinal injury, well, there's not much we can do. Oh, I should take that back. Shortly after I got out of the hospital, my arm was still like this. They put me on, I believe, Dilantin, and the idea was to have it relax all my muscles. Again, as a student of Qigong, my feeling was I don't want to mask the symptoms. I actually want to access my nerves and learn to release them. But I'm like, okay, he's the doctor. I still was partly... This medicine made me incredibly suicidal. Like, wake up, want to die, cry all day for 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, I went, I know I've had a horrible injury and I know I've lost a lot, but this is not me. It's got to be this medicine. And I got off of it. And I went back to the doctor and he said, oh, you're one of those, 1 in 10,000 who has this possible reaction. And I'm like, dude, I have brain injury. I've been traumatized. I'm in pain. Don't you think you could at least give me a warning? He's like, well, we'll put you on a cousin of Dilantin. And I'm like, no. And from that day forward, I got off all drugs. I got off all aspirin. And I went and studied Qigong intensively and did Qigong meditation intensively, which ameliorated my pain for me, for that situation, for my injury, more than anything they had to offer me. This last severe back injury, they gave me Flexeril, which is a very powerful muscle relaxant, which had the effect of as soon as it wore off, my muscles were twice as tight. It was a total boomerang. They gave me Vicodin, which some people actually want to use recreationally, which is amazing because it was horrible. To be honest, I ended up self-medicating with scotch because that was really the only thing that cut the pain that didn't make me feel horrible. I didn't drink all day, but whenever it got really severe, I would basically lie down and drink and try to watch a movie or distract myself. Most of the time I took nothing. I certainly stopped taking all their prescriptions. My experience with most of what has been prescribed to me over the years is that it either makes you feel horrible or it makes you feel good, and as soon as it wears off, you feel twice as bad. There's just this huge boomerang with opiates and with these muscle relaxants. In a way, they're kind of missing the point. I mean, pain is physiological, but it's also psychological. Yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in Western medicine in terms of pain management. I personally think that meditation and things like Qigong, yoga. I started taking a certain kind of yoga called Svarupa yoga recently, which is a very supported pose, sort of mellow, old person yoga, and it has ameliorated my pain tremendously. Orthobionomy, which is a very simple touch, has done more for my pain than all the opiates in the world and all the scotch in the world put together.
Great. So I'm curious, obviously you've suffered a great deal of pain. What would be the key thing that you would tell people who are suffering from pain right now?
Well, I don't want to be presumptuous because there's all kinds of pain, but you have to take control. Nobody knows what you're experiencing as well as you do. And if you have an inquisitive mind, and if you say, I want to get better and I'm going to try everything I can. And we have this great thing called the internet, which we didn't have after my spinal cord accident. You know, I could go online and find 50 million different ways to work with a back injury now. I would encourage people in whatever pain they're in to shy away from chemical drugs, except for the most extreme pain, and to explore the psychology of their pain, their relationship to the pain, whether the pain is indeed trying to tell them something and inform their lives, which I believe. I believe that the pain is there for a reason, because your body or your mind aren't listening, are trying to tell you something and you're not listening to it. So, you know, you don't have to make friends with your pain and be all warm and fuzzy with it, but you have to listen to it and realize that maybe the path you're on, the way you're driving yourself or you're living your life is not feasible, you know, is not tenable anymore, and that you have to adapt. And I do think mental disciplines like meditation and energetic bodywork techniques like Reiki, like orthobionomy, which is both physical and energetic, offer, and there are many others, of course, offer far more chance of helping most intractable pain. I also think people in severe pain really should seek psychological help. It is devastating and it is traumatizing. And the medical establishment is like, oh, you know, you hurt your back. And it's like, no, I didn't hurt my back. That's not all of it. I am freaking out here. I can't function. I don't feel like a man because I have to ask my girlfriend to tie my shoes. Like, there's a million different things that come up with pain. For men, I felt totally emasculated every time I've had a severe injury, you know, and that's been something I've had to deal with too. There are a lot of psychological aspects as well, but I don't think most pharmacology is useful. Look how many people in this country are addicted to pain meds now. It's an epidemic. I never went there. They gave me some stuff. I was like, no, this is not the way to go, and I'm glad for that. I was not a very grateful person before my accident. And I actually tell people that my horrific accident, which took away a lot of my youth, is really kind of a gift, because I do feel gratitude that I'm in less pain, that I can move, that I can take care of myself. There is a gratitude I experience now that I never experienced before that spinal cord injury. So I actually do call it a gift. Every day I wake up and I go, I can move. I can cook. I can wipe my ass. I couldn't do that. I can make love. I can play with my kids. I can play an instrument. Like everything that I still have, even though I can't run and I can't ski and there are like lots of things I can't do, but I have so much. And I think if you haven't lost anything, you can take it for granted. And I did. And I don't anymore. So I call it a really good gift wrapped in really horrible wrapping paper. That's actually what I call it, which sounds cliche, but it's true. It was a horrific experience. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but on some level, it did make my life much better and more meaningful. Made every day more meaningful.